So let's deal with the Soninke. And to deal with the Soninke, we shall be dealing with the rise of the Kingdom of Ghana, or as it was called by its inhabitants, Ouagadougou, which was founded around the 100 CE by the Soninke people, who, according to their tradition, migrated from the city of Sonin or Aswan in Upper Egypt to the region of where? Southeastern Mauritania. All right, so even they have in their traditions that they made their way into Mauritania as well, but they're coming from Sonin or Aswan. And if you watch my part one of African Israelite Diaspora, you will know that what Aswan and Sonin was a Jewish colony. All right. And this source is coming from Encyclopedia of African American History. The Soninke migrations would have been taking place from Aswan around 486 BCE. All right. And that's according to Boubacar Long, who situates the departure of the Soninke ancestors, the Bafour, from Egypt no later than 486 BCE as a result of extractions of the Persian king Darius, who reigned between 522 to 586 BCE on the inhabitants of the Nile Valley. The foundations of the society and the state would later become the Empire of Ghana, would have occurred no later than 460 BCE. All right, and this is coming from the African Fact Book. And what's very interesting about this is that a few hundred years later, we have Jeremiah on the scene who's actually warning Jews, who made their way into Egypt that, evil will befall them, that curses and plagues and things like that would come upon them, and that they would not make their way back into the land of Egypt. All right. And that's actually Jeremiah 44 verses 1 through 7. If anybody want to throw that in the chat. So continuing on, we're gonna get into the Kingdom of Ghana, dealing specifically with the Soninke. And we're gonna line this all the way up. It says, as the most northern of the Mandi peoples, the Soninke were also in contact with the nomads of the Sahara, from whom they acquired small horses brought from northern Africa. The Soninkes, or the early Soninkes, superior iron weaponry and horses made it possible for them to establish a kingdom. All right. And on a genetic sense, we know who would have been bringing this, or who we know who would have been bringing this iron weaponry in. They gradually expanded their territory and dominated neighboring rulers until by the 10th century, the kingdom had become an empire. Visitors from the North African began referring to the Soninke state as Ghana, but the Soninke themselves and other Mandi peoples know the ancient kingdom as Ouagadougou. So let's look into the legend of Ouagadougou. All right, so let's look at the legend of Ouagadougou. So the legend often begins by describing how the ancestor, Dinga, came from somewhere in the Middle East. So that's one thing we have to take into account. The Soninke, all right, the Mandi people, the Bafour, they do not claim to be stagnant. They do not claim that they've always been in West Africa. All right, they claim to come from somewhere in the Middle East. And we're going to pinpoint that. Some say he stayed for a time at Gini, an ancient city that still exists on the Niger River north of modern Mali's capital, Bamako. Dinga later moved to the town of Dia in a middle delta, where he married and had two sons who became Soninke ancestors in other towns of the Sahel. Dinga movements from place to place are the storyteller's way of explaining the presence of the Soninke populations in various places of the Sahel. And remember, those Soninke populations would also include the Bafour. He is said to have eventually arrived at a place southwest of Niaro in today's Mali. It goes on to say, Dinga's emergence victorious, and married the three daughters of a chief genie. The sons of these wives became the ancestors of many Soninke clans, one of which was the Kissi. It was the Kissi that became the ruling clan of Ouagadougou. In the next episode of the legend, Dinga was grown old and blind. He had decided that before he dies, he wanted to pass his chiefly power on to his oldest son, Khan. According to one version of the story, after Dinga died, Diab Kessi had fled from the wrath of his enraged older brother. And I'm just skipping through this to summarize the history and legend and formation of this kingdom. But I am going to bring some important things out. It says later, after the kingdom was founded, they became chiefs or governors of the four providences. So Dinga eventually had four children, and they became the king or rulers over these four providences. One of the sons, Jeb set out to find a new location where he could settle, and he wound it up at a place called Kumbi Sahel, which is located in southern part of what is now Mauritania, just north of the border that shares it with Mali. So even in their oral traditions, they're telling us they made their way into, or they was in actually Mauritania, just like their ancestors, the Bafour. It goes on to say that when Diabe Kesse arrived at the site where the town of Kumbi Sahel was to be established, he found it guarded by a giant snake named Beta. In several versions of the legend, Beta is said to have lived in either a well or a cave. Most significantly, the giant snake is usually thought of as a python and is associated with the presence of a water at the location of the new settlement. Diabe Kesse entered into a pact with the snake Beta. All right, so remember that Diabe Kesse entered into a pact with the snake Beta. In return from this annual sacrifice, Beta guaranteed that abundant rain would fall on Ouagadougou and that there will become a plentiful supply of gold. In the new kingdom, the new kingdom was called Ouagadougou and had its capital at Kumbi Sahel. It prospered under the rule of Diabe Kesse and his descendants, who were known by the title of Magan. It goes on to say the descendants of Diabe Kesse, the descendants of the four Fado, or commanders of the province, were recognized as the aristocrat clans of the Soninke. These aristocrat clans were collectively called Wago, the term of the name of the kingdom. Ouagadougou are probably related. Ouagadougou is a contraction of Ouagadougou, which can be translated as the land of Wago. Once a year, representatives for the four provinces of Ouagadougou would assemble at Kumbi Sahel to participate in the virgin sacrifice to Beta, the guardian serpent. All right, so let's continue on. And before we get into something, I want to bring out the fact that we do see a Hebrew connection with the rulers of the Soninke kings. For example, we saw that the name of their rulers were known as Magan, and even in the Bible we see, or in the Strong's Concordance in Hebrew, we see that Magan actually means deliverer, and that's according to Strong's H4042. And again, according to the Mandi linguistics, their ruler title is known as Magan, which is chief. All right, so we see a similarity there between the Hebrew title of Magan and the Mandi title of Magan, deliverer and chief. But it continues on saying that after an unspecific number of generations passed, the year arrived when the virgin to be sacrificed happened to be the girlfriend of a young man of noble birth. When the girl was about to be given to Beta, the young man leaped forward with his sword and cut off the snake's head. As Beta's several head went bounded to the sky, it pronounced a dreadful curse. From that time on, no rain would fall on Ouagadougou, and no more gold would be found there. Deprived of rain and gold, Ouagadougou declined, came into ruin. Its Soninke people were dispersed, and the countryside became a desert. Now, what in the world is going on here with this legend of a snake known as Beta? Now, I know that might go over some people's heads at first, but I think we can actually make a connection to ancient Israel with this. Again, according to this tradition, they had an ancestor named Dinga that came from somewhere in the Middle East. He made his way into Mauritania, and his sons ended up founding a kingdom where they, guess you could say, brought this type of serpent worship into the kingdom. And we see here, because of no more sacrifices given into this serpent, the kingdom actually fell, which could be punishment from the Most High in the first place. But again, when Diabe Kesse arrived at the site where the town of Kumbi Sahel was to be established, he found it guarded by a giant snake named Beta. I believe this is a connection to the tribe of Dan. But why do you say that, Will? If we go to the book Understanding Dan, page 41 reads off something interesting. It says, 2 Kings 18 implies that this serpentine figure, Nethusan, had been an object of worship in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem temple for some time. However, nowhere in the Deuteronomistic story of the earlier kings of Judah is this serpentine mentioned. The possibility must have been entertained then that Nethusan was only recently erected in the temple in Jerusalem, having perhaps been brought from a northern Israelite shrine slash cult center after the collapse or the northern kingdom in 722 BCE. And more than likely, or what I do believe, is that these people do descend from these northern kingdom Israelites that made their way into Aswan and leaving around 460 after being persecuted by Darius, the Persian king. So they would have brought this specific serpent cult or serpent tradition with them, especially if they were Danites. It says it is conceivable that a northern tradition in which the character of Moses figured prominently and with whom the serpent is associated has some measure of positive evaluation for the creature, and so used this figure metaphorically as a reference for the northern tribe of Dan. Finally, storage jars with serpentine decoration have been discovered or recovered in excavations at Tel Dan, supplying further evidence for the positive regard given to this serpentine figure at this site. So even at excavation sites they find in Tel Dan, the territory of Dan, you can see this tradition in the digs. So again, I believe this beta tradition amongst the Soninke is possibly a tribe of Dan connection. But let's continue to see what we have in regards to information. And to do that, we're going to go to the Black Jews of Africa in the Americas. We're going to continue to learn a little more about Dinga. All right. And again, the sister is in the chat. She's making some very, very powerful comments. She's making some very powerful comments that, again, it goes on to a connection between the Nigerian tribes and these tribes that I'm bringing out, as far as traditions and as far as ancestry. So yes, I am aware that you all do have this same type of tradition amongst Nigerians, as well as in Benin and Dahomey. So the sister definitely knows what she's talking about. So going to read from here. It says, thus, the Soninke people who are scattered throughout and beyond the area of ancient Ghana Empire allegedly had traditions that claim an extremist origin for themselves, which invoke the memory of Dinga, their ancestor, who was believed to be of Middle Eastern extraction and to have come from Jerusalem or perhaps from Yemen. Dinga's own direct ancestors were variously believed to be the biblical Job, King Solomon, or David. One French colonial official, Maurice Delafosse, basing his views in part upon these tribal traditions, concluded that the Ghana Empire had been founded by a nomadic group from Northern Africa or Middle Eastern origin, and constructed a theory around a Judeo-Syrian racial origin of the Soninke. And I actually believe he hit that spot on the head, because we're going to see a Judeo Syrian type of tradition amongst these people. And what I mean specifically by Syrian is northern tribes of Israel coming from the Syrian captivity and making their way into this kingdom. So I would say that this kingdom was a mix of a Judeo-Syrian identity as well. So going on to the Black Jews of Africa, history, religion, and identity, continue to expound more on this. Biblical references are found in various West African traditions, as the formation of the blacksmith caste of various legends of Wagadu recorded by Charles Martel relating to the foundation of the ancient kingdom of Ghana. This tradition tells that the founders of this kingdom was the chief blacksmith Dinga, descending from King Solomon. Also remember that their ancestors, the Dinga, were known as the chief blacksmiths, and what were they called? The Yahuds. All right, so just keep that in mind. According to the tradition, when Dinga became blind and was transferring his power, he was tricked by his youngest son in the same way that Isaac tricked Jacob to deprive Esau of his rights as the eldest son. And remember, that was Can. There are different narrations of who Dinga was, but invariably, they established the fact that he was a stranger from afar, probably of white origin. We're not going to dig in too deep into that. Just know that they're mistaking this word for Badan. All right, they're mistaking the word white for Badan. But it goes on to say the lengthy component of the story of the exile of the 10 tribes are found in this myth. African scholars consider the legend of Ouagadougou as a condensation of stories which serve as archives for the entire ethnic group. First, there is the long Soninke journey from Yemen or Palestine, then the crossing of North Africa through Egypt and what is precisely the desert up to Adrar and Tangan and the settlements in the further north region of Timbuktu. It must be said that but in this specific cast of Smith's biblical traditions and possible Jewish influences seem to be interrelated to this point that in some regions of Mauritania, for instance, Smiths are called Yahud and Yibro. So again, one thing I really want to point out from here is that it says that the Soninke made their way from Yemen or Jerusalem, coming into North Africa, crossing through Egypt, Aswan, right? And they made their way into where? Adrar and Tangan. We know that this is the same location that the Soninke went. All right, so the Soninke and the Bafour or traditions are the same, with the Bafour staying in Adrar and Tangan, while the Soninke pushed down further south to Kumba Sahel to give rise to Ouagadougou. All right. So again, we started out with the Bafour earlier, showing how the Bafour were the original inhabitants of Adrar and Tangan, and were actually known as these Jews of this location, and how they gave rise to the Soninke. So let's go to the Negro land revisited, because it's also other Israelite traditions of different Soninke clans that we find in the Sahel. And it says right here that the inhabitants of Gumbu, for instance, who strongly associate themselves with the legendary Ouagadougou, claim that their ancestors came from the land of Canaan and were Banu Israel, that is, Hebrews. After the death of Joseph, they left Egypt and moved to the western Sahel, where they established a large empire ruled by 3 sons of their leader, Charasahani, Ibinu Haran, called Ukor, Ungara, and Songhai. These 3 brothers are the ancestors of 3 important peoples of the Western Sudan: the Soninke, the Maliki, and the Songhai. All right. And I just want to go back one sentence real quick to identify something right quick. So where it says these 3 brothers, specifically where it says these 3 brothers were called Encore, this is the Soninke people who are actually called Wakor. All right. Also, this is the Soninke or Maliki people who are known as Wagara. And of course, this is the Songhai people who gave rise to the Songhai Empire. According to him, Ouagadougou was established by conquerors who had came from the east and who had brought with them many elements of Jewish culture. All right. So again, according to tradition, these people descend from Jews who gave rise to sons known as the Wakor, the Wangara, and even the Songhai. And again, these people are known as the Soninke, the Maliki, and even the Songhai. And again, these 2 people, so these 2 tribes right here, will be descendants of the Bafour, and they will all be Mandi speaking peoples or Mandi groups. So let's continue. Back to Black Jews of Africa. We're going to start reading back about Al-Idrisis. Al-Idrisis proves or provides of substantial information about the presence of Jews near the country of Gold in the Western Sahel or present-day Mali. And if you all are noticing or peeping what's going on, I'm dealing specifically with the regions of Timbuktu, Ghana, Mauritania, Morocco. All right, I'm dealing specifically with the people known as the Mandi people. All right. It says there are only 2 cities in this land of Lam, which are not larger than villages. One is called Malah and the other is Da. According to the people of the region, the inhabitants are Jews, but most of them are submerged in empathy and ignorance. He adds, the inhabitants of Kunuria, following the sayings of merchants, claim to be Jews. Their beliefs are a mixture of everything. They are nothing and have no well-established beliefs. Information from his contemporary R. Zuri, who provides who probably quoted his predecessor's work, supports this account of Al-Idrisis. The inhabitants of Karufan in the region of Timbuktu, following the Jewish religion. One can get there from Gal or Wargla. They read the Torah or Torah. They import silk, cloth, saffron, tinted goods, corice, and pearls. It also mentions that it is tempting to merge this tradition or this information about the Jewish presence in the south of the Sahara with the traditions of Eldad the Danite, who in the 9th century claimed that Jewish tribes ruled these regions. And we already showed you what regions these were if you watch African Israelite Diaspora Part 1. However, this claim has been strongly challenged by Raymond Muni, who considers that these black groups were probably Soninke, who were conquered and dispersed by the neighboring Berbers, and who were really not Islamicized in the time of Al-Idrisis. So, Raymond Muni thought he was doing something by claiming that these people were nothing but Soninke. All right, he tried to, I guess you could say, downplay the narrative of Eldad's tradition by saying, no, they're only Soninke. But who do the Soninke say they were? And what about Eldad's tradition? It must be added to this information that Eldad had been accompanied in his travels. It is let me start over. It says, it must be added to this information that Eldad the Danite had been accompanied in his travels by another Jew of the desert who traced his origin to the tribe of Asher, son of Jacob, or among the Mandi or Soninke tribes, all right, to which some trace their origins to the chiefs of the tribes of Israel. So I'm not just digging this information up out of nowhere, family. We indeed find one name, Azer. So remember that. So when Charles Muni on this page tries to downplay the fact that, these people were just Soninke, Eldad the Danite himself said, or is said to have traveled with a Soninke Jew, who in turn is from the tribe of Asher. And this is coming from Archives Moroccains. Now it gets deeper because the Soninke actually do have a connection to Azer. All right, and we're going to read that through the language depth, factual and theoretical explorations with special references to East Africa. It tells us something very interesting. It says Welmers, for example, classifies Azer as a Soninke dialect. Azer has died out in Mauritania and is probably in a process of extinction in Mali. Azar has now effectively vanished, and the last speakers of it in Wadan or Oyudan, remember Wadan or Oyudan was Bafour territory. It says Alubada B. Babu of the Idal al-Hajj died at the beginning of the century, or it is no exaggeration to say that this language, a dialect of Soninke, is dead as far as Mauritania is connected. He remarks that there are only people left who have remnant of the knowledge. He goes on to say he concludes that this remnant knowledge of Azer shows the profound influence of Azar on everyday life in parts of Mauritania, particularly in regions of Tangut and Adrar. Okay, we keep seeing the homeland of the Bafour popping up when it comes to the Soninke. But again, this author made a beautiful, beautiful point when linking up these Soninkes to the tribe of Asher by way of their language, which is now said to be extinct. And again, Eldad the Danite is said to have traveled with a Jew of the desert from the tribe of Asher, who's said to be a Mandi or Soninke, who in turn traced their origins to the chiefs of the tribes of Israel. Let's continue on, going back to Black Jews of Africa. It is therefore not surprising that a century later, there are pre-census as profession a religion that was a mixture of all sorts of things, and that as they were not considered as Muslim by the Arabs, and as not wanting to be called heathens, as to avoid the fate reserved by Islam for idolaters. These Soninkes simply declared themselves as Jews. That's what they called themselves, all right? These Soninkes simply declared themselves as Jews, thus the people of the book. And as such, were only subject to special tax, the Hajj Raj, whereas Had they been called heathens, they would have sooner or later have been condemned to slavery. One remark is nonetheless necessary regarding Muni's reflections. To call themselves Jews suggests that the Soninke must have had some knowledge of Jews in the south of the Sahara. The Tariq al-Fatash also mentions the existence of a colony of the Banu Israel living in Terminda in the southeast of Timbuktu, in the place where the city of Termina was founded in 1496. An Israelite population had formerly lived, whose wells and tombs still remain. All right, remember when we was reading about the Balfour, they were associated with the Banu Israel, who were well builders as well. And one thing we need to point out as well, because a lot of people like to say there's no evidence or material culture of Jews being in West Africa. But right here we have wells and Jewish tombs in Timbuktu to this day. All right. We have Jewish wells and Jewish tombs in West Africa to this day. These Jews who inhabited this place until the 15th century lived on agriculture and had dug wells because they grew vegetables, which they sold for which merchants paid them considerable amounts of money. So even here, these Soninkes are connected to the Bani Israel, just like their ancestors, the Balfour. So let's go into that. Let's go into the Bani Israel connection to the Soninke. Judaic threads in West African tapestry, no more forever. The continuing presence of the Bani Israel in sub-Saharan Africa was subsequently documented by more recent observers on the scene. In 1940, a mission to the Bantu region in Upper Guinea recorded information on the Janaka or Janakank network of early Islamicized Soninke-speaking cloth trading communities who claimed descent from the Bani Israel. So you even had Soninke who were Islamicized, who still claim to be descendants from this community of Bani Israel. All right. According to the local informants, they speak a language which few of us have begun to comprehend. They marry amongst themselves. They do not mix with other populations. They are Muslims, but practice the religion in a very rudimentary fashion. The populations of the Banoon have never ceased to call them Bani Israel. All right. So even the populations call them Bani Israel. Among the written histories found there, one began in Hebrew, then continued in Arabic in another. Certain parts were in Abrani, a script very widespread among the Janaka. All right. And this is a Soninke people. Abrani, as close cognate of Ibraniya, recalls the illustrated secret script mentioned above. So again, even these Soninke have a connection to the Bani Israel communities of the Sahel. All right, so let's continue. It's getting deep, family. It's getting deep. In Senegalese bush, Bani Israel tribe claims Jewish heritage. Proud Muslims. The villagers must change their name and their birthplace to enter Mecca, but still do not deny Jewish ancestry. So again, they are Muslims, but they don't deny their Jewish ancestry. And we know who they were converted to Islam by. So, Bani Israel, Senegal, here we welcome you into his earthen floor home, introduce you to his 3 wives, and let you sample their cooking. But Duga Tuigo, Fado, does not want foreigners to come near the sacred tree of his village deep in the Senegalese bush. So give me 1 second. It says, the tree is holy ground, says Fido, president of the remote settlement of 4,000 souls. Our Jewish ancestors, Jacob, planted it here when his peoples first settled here 1,000 years ago. The lush capote tree towers over the parched silvery at the edge of Bani Israel, a dusty community in eastern Senegal, near the border of Mali. The residents, all Muslims, are members of a tribe whose name means sons of Israel. And they trace their lineage to 2 clans, Sela and Drame. They say they are descendants from Egyptian Jews. Again, who are the Sela and Drame? The Sela and Drame are descendants of the Soninke. They're nothing but a Soninke tribe. And another thing right here where it says this is getting very interesting, because again in Jeremiah 44 it's specifically mentioned that you have Jews in Elephantim. It's not mentioned as Elephantimes. I believe it's Taphanese. It's either Taphanese or Nof that's specifically outlining this specific community where their ancestors were. And Jeremiah gave warning to these people, letting them know, y'all not coming back to the land of Israel. All right, because y'all did want to listen to me. Well, let's continue. It says, we are all practicing Muslims. Excuse me, let me get my pointing back. We are all practicing Muslims, and we do not want to become Jewish. All right. Listen to what he said. We are all practicing Muslims, but we do not want to become Jewish, Fadigo says. In fact, we do not like to talk too much about our Jewish background, but we do not hide it either. We know our people came from Egypt to Somalia and from there to Nigeria, where they split about 1,000 years ago. One branch of the two families went to Mali, another to Guinea, and we settled here. All right. It goes on to say that West Africa, well, let me start from here. It says Bihar believes the historic presence is responsible for some of the faint Jewish traces still visible in the region. West African musicians often decorate the traditional 21-string bridge harp known as the kora with Jewish symbols, including the Star of David. All right, so you can also find this, and they're also known as griots. All right, so if you was just to look up griot musicians or West African bards, you can see the type of music they play, and these are all Bafor, Soninke, Mandi people. All right, and it is said that they have, Jewish inscriptions and symbols on their instruments, basically. Now going down here to the next highlighted. It says, I believe there is an element of truth to the tradition of the B'nai Israel, especially since they have nothing to gain from pretending, says Bahar, who returned from Senegal in 2011. They're not seeking Israeli citizenship, nor are they claiming to be Jewish. In fact, their Jewish ancestry and name can only give them problems. And to wrap it up, it says some accounts do, however, support the last leg of the journey that Fadiga describes. The B'nai Israel are speakers of the Janakai dialect, the language of the Diakhanic tribe, which the International Journal of African Historical Studies says migrated down the Niger River, settled in Mali, Guinea, Gambia, and Senegal. All right, and we just read about these people specifically have a connection to the B'nai Israel, and we also know that they are nothing but Soninke. So let's continue to expound upon this information. And to do that, we need to figure out who are the B'nai Israel. What is the history behind these people? Who are they? Where specifically in West Africa? Where are they? And can we, identify who these people were? I think I did a good job at doing that thus far. But let's continue to figure out who they were specifically. So, the term B'nai Israel or B'nai Israel, frequently mentioned in the Quran and used by Muslim scholars as a polite designation for their Jewish colleagues in lieu of the more derogatory Yahudi, occurs frequently in an oft-cited 17th century Muslim Tariq historical account of West African history. In the course of B'nai Israel occupancy, 7 princes, descendants of the king of the Jews, ruled the city, each with major military forces, and they were reputed to be remarkable masons and well builders, and their tombs and wells were still evident. All right, and again, we just saw this tradition amongst the Soninke and Bafor being well builders, being masons, and also being having these same tombs as well in these areas. Hebrewisms of West Africa. It lets us know something as well about the B'nai Israel. It says, lately on the banks of the Niger, M. Donald D. Marizes discovered the remains of a colony of B'nai Israel, who had sunk hundreds of wells for irrigation of their gardens. These wells were preserved just as several centuries before the Negro chronicler of Gal describes them, with their walls constructed with ferreted stones and coated over with the butter of aloes, which the action of very hot fire had rendered as durable as cast iron. All right, so they had real stable, real fertile wells that they used for gardening, that they used for water, and that they used as a tradition of their people. It goes on to say, if Ghana was the capital for Jews, its ruin someday will yield up the secret. That is to say, the interest that the excavations of a city dead from 7 centuries will present. All right, so Ghana actually has to go under some more excavations, but so far they have found Jewish tombs, they have found these wells, and they have found, I guess you could say, grounds of masonry, of Jewish masonry on these specific in these specific locations. And even further up in the Sahel and like Morocco and stuff like that, they found old ancient Jewish synagogues. But I'll bring some of that out in the near future. But again, the thing to point out here is that this author made reference to the Bani Israel or the Beni Israel or Ghana being the capital of this Beni Israel community. And again, we've connected Ghana and the Beni Israel so far to these Balfour Soninke people. So it's definitely getting deep. But let's get a little bit deeper into the Bani Israel, which is what they actually known as in West Africa, the Bani Israel. And we're going to go to tracing manuscripts in time and space through paratext. All right, right here. It says the fact that a place name in a colophon may correspond to several possible locations on a map can also be observed in other OM manuscripts. This is the case for another manuscript from BULAC with the shelf mark MSARA 112B. For instance, the colophon is written separately from the main text of the folio at the end of the manuscript and states that the writing was finished by the scribe and the owner, Al-Hajj Drami, all right, living in Bani Israel. Now, before I go on, let me see something real quick, because I think we can make a quick connection. Let me see, where was that name? Right, right here. So even right here, I did not notice this at first, but right here, these Bani Israel. Let me highlight this right here. These Bani Israel have clans known as the Drami. So remember that. These Bani Israel have a clan known as the Drami, and even up here on the source that we're reading from, he has the surname Drami. And where is he living? In Bani Israel. So if anybody want to take the trip to Bani Israel, I got you. You know what I'm saying? I could book us a flight. We can catch a trip out to Bani Israel, Senegal, Timbuktu, anytime y'all want to go. All right. So you can definitely find Bani Israel in West Africa, Senegal, and that's not the only place you can find this location. But again, you can pull up the Bani Israel if you want to. Various sources suggest that Bani Israel is a major scholarly center for the Janakay or the Soninke clergics located at the Bondu region of eastern Senegal. Another place with the same name situated in the modern Kamasis Siuo region in the southern Senegal is reported in the third part of the Pakal book. In addition, there is also a place named Bani Israel in Karata and Gambia. All right, so you can also find a Bani Israel in Gambia, which could also, bring credence to the diaspora of these people, migrating throughout further places in West Africa after the fall of the Kingdom of Ghana. Now, right here, down here in the highlighted, it says Tal Tamara, pointing out that this tradition of Israelite origins is shared by numerous groups, especially those with a Fulube and Soninke background. All right, so I didn't speak on the Fulani today, but I will bring out some history on the Fulani, possibly here in the future. But what we need to take mention or reference from this specific source is that these Israelites or these people who claim Israelite origin claim to be specifically of Soninke background, in particularly of Bani Israel. And again, the Soninke themselves claim to be Bani Israel as well. So we keep seeing all these sources overlap and line up. It says, I am also grateful to Tal Tamira for referencing me to Delafossi and Bello, who mentioned this genealogy tradition in West Africa.